and a huge thank you to the Lorber family for joining us today. We feel so honored that you're here. In the first part of our program today, you will hear Fred's description of events he experienced during the Holocaust in his own voice. When I was a child, I was lucky enough to spend time with Fred, not only here in Des Moines, but also in Colorado skiing with my father. It was a really special trip. A special man who had incredible stories to tell. Thanks to the Iowa Jewish Historical Society for supporting today's event and for being a part of this Readers Theater program. I think now this is our third year doing this, and we're really excited. A huge thank you to the students at Beit Sefer Shalom and to Tali Eisenstadt for her support in making this happen. We will begin with some information from the Iowa Jewish Historical Society.
Today's program highlights the life of Fred Lorber and honors all those who perished in or survived the Holocaust. Nearly 45 years ago, Des Moines' Jewish community began a special effort to document the personal stories of many of the Holocaust survivors who immigrated to central Iowa. The first interviews in the early 1980s were on audio cassettes, as is the one IJHS has with Fred Lorber. Over the next 20 years, first Adele Anilek filmed interviews with several survivors who lived in Des Moines, and then Janice Rosenberg, after training with the Shoah Foundation, interviewed additional survivors in central Iowa. IJHS now has these and hundreds of other recordings, along with thousands of artifacts, that help document the lives and history of Jewish individuals and the Jewish community in Iowa. Today, we share 3 short excerpts from Dorothy Kirshner's 1981 audio interview with Fred Lorber. These are augmented with some photos the Lorber family shared and items from IJHS research. One caution. As I mentioned, these are early recordings, and you will find that you need to listen closely. Fred Lorber grew up as an only child in Vienna, Austria, but he was part of a vibrant Jewish community. Fred was still a teenager when his family immigrated to the United States to escape the Nazis. A 1992 Des Moines Register article quoted Fred saying, "Our family lost everything. And this country has been very, very good to me. It's given me lots of opportunity." In 2004, Fred told Rob Borsellino, another Register reporter, "It still boggles my mind how lucky we were."
Background. We lived a fairly, middle-class type of life, somewhat, I don't know if you call it affluent. I think if you compare it to the standards of the United States, it really wasn't affluent. We lived in an apartment. We had help come in, once a week. And every summer, my mother would go away to what was called the country, how we lived, and always would take a place someplace. And
were you an only child?
I was an only child, right? Fairly well spoiled. Very, very, very spoiled. We lived in a non-Jewish neighborhood. There were some Jewish people there, but not very many. We were in a very distinct minority. Vienna was a city of 2 million people and had approximately 300,000 Jews. Everybody was very alarmed. You kind of feel at that time people began sticking together. Thank goodness a lot of the Jews lived in one area. But the gangs immediately took to the streets. Most of the early party members were either people who were malcontent and disenchanted, and people couldn't find jobs, and they were just on this side of the law or on the other side of the law. And there were those who, would come out of the holes and all of a sudden have a big ego trip because they can really, it's like a Ku Klux Klan with the blacks today. It's the same kind of people. So immediately the uniforms came out, the brown shirts were out, the boots were on, the little party emblems were on people. Everybody began wearing swastikas. So you, just by sheer knowing you don't have to look Jewish, not wearing a swastika, the chances were demonstrations. There were always people marching, and always the Christians marching, so we were always like we were just unwelcome guests, and we really never belonged there, even though I had a great sense of feeling for the city itself, because the city itself is a very beautiful city, and rich in history and rich in music and many other things. And if you're born there and you grow up there, you kind of feel a certain affinity or love or whatever it may be, but this is part of you. So I always had a great sense of pride, and I always remember when one I always stands out in my mind. I was taking English in school, I think I was about maybe 13, and someone stopped in a car, and they were English people, and stopped me on the street and looking for directions. And he talked to me in English, and I was able to answer in English. I always was one of the great thrills, my God, I could tell him where to go and turn left and right, because my English was so very basic. Yeah,
yes.
But it was a great thrill to me, and I always remember that,
Yes.
I always felt so proud that I was able to communicate to somebody else in another language.
Fred Lorber was a successful businessman. He had a good life with his wife, Mickey, and their children, sons Robert and Stephen, daughters Randy and Susan. He was very active in Des Moines. His obituary listed a few of his activities: president of the Iowa Sales Executive Club, the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines, Temple B'nai Jeshurun, and the Jewish Community Center. He was a member of the Jewish Community Relations Commission, ISU's Home Economics Advisory Board, and the Simpson College Board of Trustees. Plus, he liked staying active, so he played tennis, went bicycling, and snow skiing. His legacy continues on today within the Iowa Jewish Historical Society with the book and play Fritzi, the story of Fred Lorber, and of course, through his family. If you would like to hear the entire Fred Lorber interview, please call or email the Iowa Jewish Historical Society. We will be glad to make Fred's or other of our Jewish community recordings available to you. Recently, IJHS shared more than 130 Holocaust-related audio and videotapes with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum to establish the Iowa Jewish Historical Society collection at that museum. They will be making the full content of all of these tapes available on their website, ensuring that even more people will be able to hear Fred's story and the personal stories of other survivors who built new lives for themselves and their families in Iowa.
My name is Fritzi Lorber, and I was born in Vienna, Austria in 1923.
My name is Leah Lorber, Fritzi's father. I worked hard as an executive at a textile company.
My name is Clara, Fritzi's mother. I took care of our home and was a wonderful cook.
Growing up, I loved to swim, play soccer, and especially ski in the beautiful Austrian mountains.
We lived in a nice neighborhood filled with Jews and non-Jews.
We also had a large family, so we used to take many trips to visit them.
I was even part of Hashomer Hatzion, a Jewish Zionist group, kind of like Jewish Boy Scouts.
Everything changed on March 13th, 1938, when the Nazis invaded Austria.
The streets of Vienna were filled with swastikas.
I will never forget going to the town square and seeing Hitler for the first time. The streets were packed with people as he was standing on the balcony of a hotel speaking to everybody. I was 15 when they expelled all Jewish kids from school. Thanks to the help of the Jewish community, I got a job working as a dentist assistant.
Life became confusing and frightening. Jews weren't allowed to check books out from the library, use public transportation, go to movie theaters, or even sit on public park benches. We had to stay inside our apartment to keep from being seen.
The streets became too scary. All the kids would target me on the streets for being Jewish and beat me up. I had to run away as fast as I could. Even my non-Jewish friends would stay away because they were scared of being seen with a Jew.
On the night of November 10th, 1938, I kept my family at home when angry mobs took the streets of Vienna ransacking Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues.
They called this night Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, because of all the shattered glass from broken windows.
That same night, Nazi soldiers came to our door. They said they were there to arrest Leo and Fritzi. I was scared, but I stood up to them. I told them that if they were there to take my husband, they would have to leave my young son with me.
I was arrested and taken to Dachau concentration camp, along with Fritzi's uncle.
Thankfully, we had a friend who knew German officials who could help free my father.
I walked into the Hotel Metropole filled with Nazis and went straight to the official's office. I convinced him to free my husband as long as we promised to get visas to leave the country.
After 7 months in the camp, I was so grateful to be with my family again, but I still had nightmares from all the bad memories.
We applied for visas at the American Embassy early on. After waiting for so long, we finally received visas to go to America in November 1939.
My family and I traveled a long way on a boat to America. We settled on the Lower East Side of New York City where I found work.
We eventually opened a small grocery store in Manhattan and lived in the small apartment above it.
I couldn't take much with me on the trip, just my soccer ball, my skis, and my bicycle. I went to Seward Park High School where I learned English. I even changed my name to Fred to sound more American. I studied so hard. I graduated in 2 years.
2 years later, in 1941, the United States joined allies in World War II.
Many boys, just like my son, were drafted to join the United States Army.
I was drafted in March of 1943. I trained to be a rifleman and a gunman.
My name is Miriam, but everyone calls me Mickey. A week before Fred left, we met at a dance and got along. Fred was a very good dancer, and I was sad he had to leave, but I promised to write to him while he was fighting overseas.
During the war, I fought in North Africa and Italy. Towards the end of the war, I ended up back in Vienna where I grew up as part of the first group of American soldiers. Driving through my old neighborhood, I saw streets destroyed by bomb shells, but the building I used to live in stayed standing.
I lived in the same neighborhood as the Lorbers and stayed there throughout the war. I went out the same day to fill a pail of water. I saw so many soldiers, and I tried to ignore them because I was afraid. All of a sudden, when I looked around, I saw my old neighbor, and I couldn't believe it. I dropped my pail to the ground and yelled out his name, Fritzi, Fritzi. I ran over to hug him.
I was so surprised. I came over to say hi and was filled with so many emotions, both happy and sad. Soon after, hundreds of neighbors poured into the street to greet me.
Fritzi was so generous. He handed out his rations and candy bars from the army and promised to return.
I was discharged from the Army on January 2nd, 1944, and returned to New York City to my family and the woman I loved.
3 years later, on June 15th, 1947, Fred and I got married. In 1950, we moved to Des Moines, Iowa, and raised our family. We had 4 children and 3 grandchildren. Fred even started a ski club that took many trips to Colorado that is still going on today.
I loved raising my children, working hard, and serving my community, my synagogue, and my country. I even received many awards. In May of 2012, I spoke at Camp Dodge, the headquarters of the Iowa National Guard, to the men and women who serve our country. I'm proud to have served as a soldier of the country I love, and I hope my story inspires others to never forget this important time in history.
One more round of applause. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. To our 5th through 12th graders who helped in the play, we really appreciate your support. We're now going to spend a few minutes hearing from the Lorber family. First, we'll hear from Fred's grandson, I believe. And then we'll have some questions and answers for Fred's entire family. So if you have any questions, think about them, and we'll have a moment to answer those questions in a bit.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. Okay. Hi, I'm Andy. I'm Fred's grandson. It was extremely surreal to see all the kids up here telling my grandfather's story that I grew up hearing so often straight from my poppy himself. And I know that he was very intent on making sure that his story did get told to not only his family, his immediate family, but the people in his community, the people in his temple, the people that he did business with. There's one thing that you knew about my poppy. He was not shy about talking about himself, very thoroughly. And it wasn't, from a sense that he was egotistical. He obviously had a very important story to share. And that was why he wanted to make sure that people knew it, that there were recordings of it, that he was on record talking about what had happened to him during the Holocaust, growing up, to his family, to his parents. And so now that he has passed away, and he's no longer with us, as so often is the case, there is a danger of his story and other people's stories not being told and being forgotten about. Which is why I think it is so wonderful what you guys are doing here today, what the kids are doing, that his story is continuing to pass on and be told, so that we can be sure to learn the lessons of what his story tells us about the dangers of prejudice and intolerance and anti-Semitism and fascism. And when we, there's so much time passing between his life experiences and today, these things are not over with, they're not done. And we need to continue to talk about them amongst ourselves and pass them down to our children so that they know what these experiences are, so we can make sure that we never forget and that we will never relive what had happened. So I'm so grateful that you guys had us out here to do this, and that the kids did it. They did such a wonderful job. And I'm just so thankful for it. And I really appreciate you guys taking his story into your hearts, hopefully. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Do you mind answering some questions? Wonderful. If you have a question, could you please raise your hand and I will come to you. My first question is, have you been back to Vienna as a family?
Yes, we did go back. Oh, this is my daughter, Roberta. We did go back just a few years ago. It was in 2019. We got the chance to go out to Vienna. And unfortunately, it was after Fred had passed away. I know our timing could have been a little bit better. It would have been great to go back with him too. But it was so wonderful to go back there and to see the places that he so vividly described to us. It is still such a gorgeous city, and it was really incredible to go and see. We got to go see the school, the gymnasium where he was a student. We got to sort of be in the neighborhood, in and around the neighborhood where he grew up.
We sat on all the benches, as his story tells, that when he lived in his neighborhood, they would not allow him to sit on the park benches. So we went and sat in all the park benches, and
it was really wonderful.
Yeah.
You could feel his presence there in some ways when we were there. Roberta got to go, and my son got to come with us. It was really special.
I'm Mike Cooperman, and you probably don't remember me, but I was on that Federation trip to Israel for your bar mitzvah, and I don't remember if you just had it or were having it, but I enjoyed traveling with you and Fred.
That's absolutely.
It was like 1994, 1993.
Yeah, that's right.
So I just wanted to say hello.
It's so good to see you. That was a great trip. The funny part about that trip to Israel was my grandfather lost me, I believe, in Jerusalem when we were visiting the old city, and very lucky for my mother that he was eventually able to find me. I was located and returned, so But that was a great trip.
I'd just like to say my dad did like to dance, but he wasn't a good dancer.
I would like to disagree. I thought
Can
that
you
he could cut a rug.
demonstrate? Can
Fred
you demonstrate?
no, I'm not going to demonstrate, but Fred could definitely cut a rug.
My name is Ayo, and my question is, what was it like growing up with him?
It was never a dull moment with Fred around. He was very loquacious, which means he likes to talk a lot. He was very warm and welcoming. He was a social butterfly. He loved to be around other people, to be talking to other people. He loved music. He loved art. When he would come to, I lived in New York City for a while. When he would come to visit me in New York City, it was very clear to me right away that that New York was his town. He loved New York. He loved going to Broadway and to the museums and seeing all the art that was there. It just really, you could tell that, I think it's really only like the type of people who have come so close to extinction, like Jews did during World War II and the Holocaust, that it gives you a love for the vibrancy of art and culture and human life. And I feel like my grandfather really had that because he became so close to getting wiped out along with so many other Jews of his time. So I feel like that really gave him a sense of the love of all that humanity had to offer. And he told terrible jokes and had terrible magic tricks, but he was a great grandfather.
No. Things were a little different for us.
No, it's not always easy to be raised by a Holocaust survivor because they have a lot of trauma from their past. And he wasn't a first-generation Holocaust survivor, but he was a second generation. And what the story doesn't really get into is the bravery of my grandmother, she was under 5 foot. She was a tiny little woman. And she was able to go to my father had a friend whose father was a German police officer, not a Nazi soldier. And he was she was able to go to the, she was able to go to the police officer, and then he was, took her to the Nazis. And she had to use quite a bit of money and jewelry to bribe my grandfather out of Dachau. And they were offered to go to Visa, but they only came every 2 weeks and set up a table. If you go to the Washington, D.C. Holocaust Museum, there's a very large photo of German Nazis sitting at a table issuing visa. And the first visa that was issued to my family was to Shanghai. And that was really the only country that was allowing the Jews. The United States was not welcoming the Jews. In fact, if you know some of the stories, the government sent some of the ships full of Jews back to Europe. And they didn't want to go to Shanghai, so they actually waited a longer period of time. And my father was a calm person. He wasn't normally a hysterical person. And it kind of made me realize at that moment that was a family trait, because after what my grandfather had been through in Dachau, they waited another 3 months to get the visa to New York. So I would have been out of there pronto. I wouldn't have cared where I went. I would have figured out the Shanghai thing later, but that was their mannerism. And then when my father did go back as a soldier, he was the youngest naturalized US soldier, and he was a translator. And when he went back into his Viennese neighborhood, my grandmother had given him $50 bills to give to the neighbors who were friendly towards them, who had survived the war. That was kind of an interesting part of the story.
So in the play, they just called the neighbor the neighbor. Do you actually know the neighbor's name?
No, sorry.
But that they had to have a $10,000 bond to secure their visa. So I do know that my grandparents had to work very, very hard and long in order to pay that money back. That was a lot of money back in the day. They did have a little grocery store down in Alphabet City in New York City on Avenue C and 3rd Avenue. And one year, Andy and I think Randy, you were with us, and
Yes,
our grandfather went back to the store where the location to where their store was, and it actually was at that time a Viennese coffee house. So run by an Armenian woman. So we sat in there and talked to her. She had some equally horrifying stories about how the Armenians were treated back in World War II as well.
We have a request for you to introduce yourselves, please.
My name's Andy. I'm Fred's grandson. This is, what's your name? That's Roberta. She's my daughter.
I'm Susie. I'm the youngest of four, and I live in San Jose, California.
I'm Randy Lorber, and I live in Des Moines, and I'm the second from the oldest.
I don't know where Mickey grew up, but I always wondered how Fred and Mickey ended up in Des Moines and why they stayed in Des Moines. I mean, having grown up in a much more cosmopolitan area, obviously you said he loved New York. Did they ever consider going back to a big city?
No, my father so he met my mom at a USO dance, and that's how they became a couple. And then so they got married, and he saw an ad in the paper for a position at Brody's and Son. If you remember F. Brody and Sons, it was on Court Avenue. And so then my brother was 2. My older brother, Steve, was 2. And then I was just a baby. And that's when we moved here. And they just acclimated to Des Moines. They loved Des Moines. And he became very successful, and then worked there for many, many years, and then went to Lortex. It used to be Ladin Industries. In fact, the daughter is over here, who is the daughter of Jack Ladin, who owned it. Granddaughter, sorry. And so that's how that came to be.
I would also add that if you knew Fred, you knew that if he stayed in New York, he would have been a small fish in a big pond. But coming out here to Des Moines, I think he saw an opportunity to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond. And I think he that appealed to him. He saw that this was a place that, had a small Jewish community that had the potential to be a larger one, and that there was business opportunities here for him. And he was obviously able to make a lot of success for himself here. And I think it was very much because of the community that he chose was a reflection of his own personal success. So.
And also, we spent every summer in New York, and they always were back in New York because my mother was born and raised in Brooklyn, and then they went and lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Astoria, New York, which is a fantastic neighborhood. It's very close to the airport. And her parents were immigrants, and they were very poor. And my grandfather, my mother was the youngest of 4 daughters, and they all lived in this 1-bedroom apartment. My aunt actually lived in this apartment for 67 years until she died. And my grandfather, when my mother was very young, my grandfather had a parking lot, and he would work on cars, and he was actually leaning over a motor, smoking a cigarette, and the car exploded. And
Andy
killed.
doesn't like that you're telling the story.
Who doesn't?
Andy.
Oh, I'm just telling this what her history was, and then they were even poor at that point. So when she met my dad, and I think she also saw that he had, good personality and earning potential.
And he was a good dancer.
We have time for a few more questions.
What did he do in his free time?
Oh, good question.
Goodness.
Good question.
Do you have all day?
How much? He loved to ski. He loved to ride his bicycle. He loved to play tennis. He loved to play poker with his friends. He loved to go to concerts and to see musical performances and to go to theater performances. He loved to read. He read a great deal. He was an avid consumer of the news. He read newspapers. If there was something out there, Fred would consume it. He was a sponge for all of that kind of stuff. But I would say mostly it was about, he loved the arts, but he loved activity. He loved to ride his bike. Tried to get me to ski many, many times, and I was not good at it and could not keep up with him, but not for lack of trying on Fred's part.
He got me kicked out of ski school because he came down the mountain and sprayed this whole class with snow.
Did Fred do anything to grow the Jewish community here? Because right now it's small. Was it bigger?
Oh, very, very much. He was always promoting Des Moines. He was president of the temple. He was president of Jewish community. He recruited, he promoted, he loved this community. He was passionate about it. So yes, he did everything he could to grow the community. He brought families in from Russia that were immigrants that were, denied their Jewish rights in the country. So he brought them to Des Moines.
Is there any of you who haven't met Fred?
So unfortunately, Roberta was born after he passed away, so she did not get a chance to meet him. But she did get to meet Fred's wife, Mickey. And it was when Roberta was a tiny little baby, Mickey. Oh yeah, Roberta wanted me to tell you that she bit Mickey's finger, and Mickey went ow. But so that was. I'm glad that she got a chance to meet her great granddaughter. But it was unfortunate she didn't get to meet Fred. They would have liked each other a great deal, I think.
I would like to say that we had a younger brother, Robbie, who today is his death day. He died in 1991, and that was a horrible experience for my parents. He was only 3 when they discovered a brain tumor, but he lived into his mid-30s. So that was just
today's his yard site.
Yeah, today's his.
And Roberta is named after him.
Andy, where's your son?
Oh, he's back in New Jersey. Was that a question for me or for? Oh yeah. I have a son named Ezekiel who's named after the aforementioned great grandfather who blew himself up, and he's back at home with my wife.
Andy also has 2 sisters, Laura and Emma, that are school teachers. And they're in San Jose, California.
What year did Fred and Mickey move to America?
So Fred immigrated here in 1939 from Austria, and Mickey was born here. Mickey was born in Brooklyn and born and raised in Brooklyn. So, but her parents were from Belarus, part of Russia. Or near Russia, and they had immigrated before Mickey was born.
Part of your story about going back to Austria and sitting on the benches and everything, it was striking to me because we just screened a film, A Real Pain with Jesse Eisenberg.
I want to see that.
And he and his cousin go on a Holocaust tour in Poland because of their grandparents and their grandmother, and they go back to where she lived and everything. And one part of the film that I thought was really meaningful was this sort of epiphany that they are Polish. They never would have probably left. They would have stayed and had their families there and had a life there. I mean, do you ever wonder, you are Austrian, what that might have been like? And it made me
it's such an interesting question. Let me just say really quick that, you always have to consider, what if certain events not transpired. Yes, it may well have been the case that he never would have come to America, right? But there was something so distinctly American about Fred at the same time. Something, that it's hard to imagine him not raising his family here. So I don't know. I just wanted to suggest that, but it's a really great question.
My grandparents actually are from Poland. They're from Belz, Poland, and they left during the pogroms. And that would have been a completely different story for them. I'm sure they may not have survived, or they would have had much more experiences with the camps if they'd stayed in Poland. But my father loved Vienna. It was funny because he was very against Poland. He had no desire to go there. He was very angry about the government, but the Viennese government, he forgave them. But Several years ago, the Viennese government reached out to us and wanted to know if we wanted to apply for dual citizenship in Austria. And I had put together all the paperwork for all of us to have a dual citizenship with the Austrian government, but I didn't want to give them my American passport. They wanted our passports. And now in hindsight, with their government now becoming a fascist government, I think it's a little too late, but maybe someday.
Yes, we're going to do one more question. I just want to say thank you again for being here and adding to this special program.
Hi, I'm Tali. So
You
both
did
of
such a good
my-
job with this, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you
you.
so much. I mean, this is really meaningful for me. Both of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, one from Bergen-Belsen and one fought in the forests in Lithuania. And it's kind of like a two questions. One, I know it was very hard for my grandparents to talk about what happened. So I'm very curious when your family, when your parents and grandparents started talking about what happened. And then my second question was something I didn't realize until many, many years later was coming back from a concentration camp. Many years later, my grandmother was receiving checks from the German government, kind of like reparations. So I'm curious if Leo ever received the same from Dachau.
So Leo and Clara did not receive reparations, but Fred did. He received $600 a month from it was called a Stop Education Fund from the government that he got every year until he passed away. And then at one point they did offer him an apartment in Vienna, but they wanted him to spend 75% of his time there. He would have done it in a minute, but my mother refused to even consider it, so, which was very typical.
I think in terms of your question about him talking about it, I never really remember a time when he wouldn't talk about it. You know, there was not a period of Fred's life where he was shy about sharing his experiences. And I think to some degree, it was because he himself did not, I think, personally experience the traumas of the inside of a concentration camp. You know, his father was arrested. They were able to escape. Theirs is a story of surviving and escape. And I think because of that, he gave him some more freedom, maybe some more flexibility to talk about these experiences. And I know that he felt enormously privileged and lucky. And I'm sure that there was like a lot of guilt wrapped up in that as well. You hear so much about survivor's guilt and all these things. I think he saw it as because of that experience, that he saw it as his responsibility to share his story with as many people as he can. And that would require him to open up about past traumas. So I think that was a real important part of sort of how he viewed all of this.
And Mickey was great at saying, Fred, I've heard this story before. Fred, I've heard this. That was one of her
Amazing.
refrains.
Thank you so much for
thank you.
sharing your stories with us. For all of you who are here today, it becomes our responsibility to continue to share Fred's story, and I empower you to do so.